Hello, my name is Everett Fly, and I'm a professional architect and landscape architect, and we're here in Northeast San Antonio at the historic Hockley-Clay Family Cemetery. And there's a story here. The cemetery was first identified in the 1970s when Easter Clay sold the property to a homeowner developer and moved off of the land. The land was sold save and except for the cemetery. And then in the 1990s, local archaeologist Clint McKenzie remembered visiting the cemetery as a boy, and he filed a notice of discovery. And then essentially the cemetery was left untended for the next 20 years. And then in 2015, resident of Northern Hills, Major Mike J. Wright, rediscovered the cemetery as he walked his children to school right next door and realized that it was an overgrown cemetery. He did some deed work, he did some public records research, he did some census research, and was able to connect it to the Hockley-Clay family.
My name is Belmille Clay. I'm a descendant of the Hockley-Clays. This is the Hockley-Clay Cemetery. There's a lot of stories here. When I was a mere lad, a little bitty fella, we used to call this, we didn't call it a cemetery, we called it the graveyard, and that's where the dead people lived. So my cousin brought me up here one day, and we were playing around, and he says, "That's where Uncle Robert is." And I say, "Uncle Robert?" He said, "Yeah, it's your great uncle." And I say, "This is where they buried him?" He said, "Yes." So I left. And I think the next time I came back was to a funeral. In the cemetery, I have my dad, 3 brothers, an uncle, a great uncle. Those are the only ones I can remember, but I know there's quite a few people here. And I was told that there was a Buffalo soldier in the family that is buried here. The last person buried here was my dad in December 1971, which was 3 years after my youngest brother was buried here.
As we cleared the debris and the brush, we uncovered on the north end a series of cedar posts in a row. And then in the middle of the north property line of the cemetery, we uncovered 2 large 12-inch diameter, they're telephone posts essentially. And working with the descendants, the Clay brothers, they were able to explain to us that those were the 2 posts that were the gate posts to the cemetery. They also told us that they remembered the cedar posts being repaired and replaced over the years. So as we were able to uncover the other property lines, we were watching and looking for any additional cedar posts. And so we've managed to keep the ones that were left in place, and we'll keep them in place as the maintenance and care goes on.
The history I knew about this cemetery is my great-great-grandmother. I hope I have the great number right. Her name was Jane Warren, and Mr. Fly, who is a good friend of mine now, he showed me this picture, and if you think about it, it looks just like a flag. The layout of this cemetery is like the flag, and the road to enter the cemetery is like the flagpole. And it's ironic that this lady, back a former slave, had the vision to see this and dedicate this land.
My role actually began in 2015 when Major Mike Wright contacted me. And Major Wright was looking for someone to help him understand the process, recovery process, historic preservation and conservation process, state laws and regulations related to cemeteries and so forth. As many would know, a cemetery is actually a landscape in itself. And being a landscape architect, I began to realize how important it is. And then Major Wright had collected his own history initially of the family, and I realized that it was an African-American family It was a family that had been enslaved. We don't know how they raised the money to buy this land, but they actually owned more than 60 acres surrounding this 1.26 acre cemetery tract. And that's very rare in America, in Texas, in Bexar County, to be able to find property that was purchased by African Americans and then set aside as a sacred burial ground. And then sure enough, once we uncovered the deed records, we found the 1923 or 24 dedication of the cemetery that actually says that the family, the Hockley family, was dedicating it for the use, it says, of colored people and others in the immediate area.
My grandmother was one that could come out here whenever there was a death in the family, and she could tell you where to bury. Bury that person over by Aunt so-so, by Uncle so-and-so. And I don't know, she had it in her mind who was buried where.
We don't know all of the series of marriages and extended family relationships, but we know that Jane Warrens, she was the enslaved lady who dedicated this property for the cemetery, but Jane's sons were named Hockley. Alonzo was one of the older ones, and then the Hockleys intermarried with the Clays, they intermarried with the Griffins, they intermarried with the Winters, and several others. And so in this particular site, most of the folks that are buried are Hockley descendants and Clay descendants, even though there are some Winters here. And we know that there are some Griffins that intermarried into the family, rather. And so once we did the oral interview with Mr. Velmo Clay and his brother Zelder, they helped us understand the extended family relationship, and they actually remembered this being called the Hockley-Clay Family Cemetery.
There's quite a few people buried here. I'm a family of 7 boys, no girls. There's only 7 boys in my family. And 3 of them are buried here, which was the oldest of the family, which none of us knew because he died when he was an infant. And then the brother that was under me, and I remember him because we were little bitty guys. I think he was like 12 months when he passed away. And then my baby brother, which I have a program here, and he died in a car accident when he was about 19 years old.
I wanted to lend my experience and expertise to helping the Hockley family recover, this cemetery. And it turns out in the process, we learned that the Hockley family is quite an extended family.